Yeah.
Ah, there it is.
Yay!
Geographic names and all that.
All right, so next, welcome back. Next we have Mary Farag from Yale University, who will be giving a presentation on website galleries of the White Monastery Candle Room manuscript fragments, challenges of digitization and classification. And Mary's been working on this project for a number of years with Steve Davis and some other folks at Yale. It is really exciting to have you here. Anybody who works on the White Monastery is kind of looking at this paper title and like, ooh, this looks pretty cool. So we're very pleased to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Well, thank you for having me here, and good morning. In 2011, members of the Yale Monastic Archaeology Project found manuscript fragments in the White Monastery. My presentation is about those manuscript fragments and our publication of them on the project's website. If you'd like to browse the website on your own electronic devices during the course of the presentation, please go to the address listed at the bottom of the slide, www.yale.edu/AE_white_candle room fragments.html. First, I will address the significance of finding hundreds of manuscript fragments in the candle room of the White Monastery Church. Then I will explain the methods used for digitizing and classifying them. And throughout, I will describe our goals and some of the challenges we faced. Since 2006, the Yale Monastic Archaeology Project has been working in Soheg, Egypt, to document the architecture of the church of the White Monastery. Part of the church complex included a monastic library, a collection that contained over 1,000 books, the largest in medieval Egypt. A large percentage of extant Coptic texts originally derived from that collection. These include the voluminous writings of the famous monastic leader Shenouda. As a result, the White Monastery has played a central role in the development of Coptic studies as a historical field. Today, the thousands of leaves of the library's holdings are housed in far-flung places, from Cairo to Cambridge, from Paris to St. Petersburg, from Naples to New Haven. Although we know that the leaves came from the White Monastery, it remains a mystery as to where the books had been stored in the church complex prior to their dispersal. Where were the books of the White Monastery Church kept? There are three possible candidates. On the basis of architectural evidence, one candidate for the location of the library would be a room in the southeast corner of the church. Today, this room serves as the monastery's gift shop. The room contains a series of wall recesses. These recesses may have served as receptacles of bookshelves. From the written testimony of modern European visitors, another candidate emerges as to where books were kept. In 1901 and 1904, the Russian scholar Vladimir de Bach and the English Coptologist Walter Crum each reported on wall inscriptions in, quote, a small room to the north of the central apse. The Coptic wall inscriptions named different corpora of biblical, patristic, historical, and hagiographical texts. The inscriptions are no longer extant, but the place de Bach and Crum described was the small sacristy, or pastophorion, to the north of the apse. The sacristy, or pastophorion, is probably the same room concerning which Gaston Maspero wrote in 1892. Maspero described a, quote, hidden cell containing incomplete books, detached leaves of discarded Bibles, Gospels, or collections of sermons that were once used in the monastery, heaped pell-mell on the floor of a small room located behind the choir in a keep that was connected with the body of the church only by means of a very narrow secret passage. End quote. Maspero would later write of another hidden room, a storage chamber, found in 1906 during renovations of the northeast corner. He wrote that in the storage chamber there, quote, came to light a significant quantity of manuscripts, in addition to superb pieces made of brass. The Antiquities Service took hundreds of pages, which it conferred over to the Jacobite Coptic Patriarchate in Cairo. Then, after the archaeological supervision of the work was withdrawn, entire books and hundreds of fragments began to appear on the market, end quote. We can now identify Maspero's storage chamber with what is known today as the Candle Room. In 2001, material evidence of manuscripts were found in the Candle Room, 2 flights of stairs above the Pestiforium. The team studying the architecture of the church since 2006 took interest in the Candle Room in 2011. Their goal was to locate an entry point from the Candle Room to a space under the northeast staircase. To this end, the team had the floor and wall recess of the Candle Room excavated. In 3 areas, hundreds of little manuscript fragments were found. These fragments are the broken edges left behind after the sale of the final batch of White Monastery manuscripts in 1906. They are the book dandruff, so to speak, that did not make its way to libraries across the globe. The Candle Room, then, is a 3rd possible location for the storage of books in the Church of the White Monastery. The combination of archaeological evidence and the written reports of Gaston Maspero suggests that the Candle Room housed manuscripts of the White Monastery for a period of time. The digitization of the find began with photo documentation in 2012 and continued in 2014 with the preparation of the photographs for website publication. Members of the Yale Monastic Archaeology Project, namely Stephen Davis, Elizabeth Davidson, Daniel Shriver, and I, photographed the manuscript fragments. Our goal was to document each item of the find to facilitate future research on them. We encountered 3 main challenges in the process of photo documentation. Challenges of where we worked, when we worked, and what we worked on. Since our work fell under the supervision of the Inspector of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, our work took place in a small room at the entrance to the inspectorate's balcony. The sun offered lighting through the balcony doorway. A small desk offered a surface for the tripod, camera, scale, fragments, documentation IDs, and bags. When photo documentation began, fragments had already been grouped by find locus and type of material. For example, this fragment containing decorative crosses was found in locus 1129, a break in the plaster floor along the north wall. The number assigned to the material parchment within that locus was 3124. As we photographed each fragment, we numbered them within each grouping. So this fragment was the 15th one photographed in the batch of parchment found in locus 1129. The photo documentation extended over the course of 2 weeks prior to Christmas 2012. The inspector allotted us approximately 5 hours per day to photograph and study the fragments. We managed to complete the project with a great deal of haste. Because we were constantly aware of the time constraints, our procedure for photographing, storing, and studying the fragments was not ideal. We did the best we could with the time and resources at our disposal. Above all, the condition of the fragments themselves posed challenges for photo documentation. We could not set many of the folded or rolled fragments flat on the photo board on account of their delicate state of preservation. However, when it was possible, we held the fragments unrolled for the purpose of taking the photographs. In some cases, 2 fragments adhere to one another in such a way that they could not be disentangled without damage occurring. Already in 2012, we had determined that research on the fragments would require crowdsourcing. Our own efforts have resulted in only 3 identifications so far. Daniel Shriver was able to identify this fragment as a portion of a manuscript housed in Paris containing Shenuta's Canon 9. Textual and codicological information provided clues on the identification trail. On the basis of textual information alone, Daniel was also able to identify this fragment as containing text from the Beatitudes, Matthew 5, verse 4 on one side and 5, verse 11 on the other. I identified this fragment as deriving perhaps from a typicon, a liturgical directory. The fragment contains an abbreviation typical for the genre, Hori Rho for Hermeneia. Juliana Atanasova, who is working on a book about the White Monastery Typica, will hopefully be able to shed further light on the fragment. For the rest, we expect that a combination of textual, codicological, and visual comparisons will facilitate further identification. We imagine and hope that scholars who work on manuscripts of the White Monastery will examine the photographs of the fragments. Perhaps they will be able to join a fragment from the candle room to its leaf housed elsewhere in the world. With such hope in mind, Stephen Davis launched a project in 2014 to prepare the photographs for website publication. Our web designer, Bjorn Axelsson of Icehouse Design, offered us the presentation format you've seen in the last several slides. There are 2 rows of 6 thumbnails on the left. Rolling over or clicking on one of the thumbnails enlarges it for view on the right. The space below the thumbnails provides room for captions. At present, the captions provide information about fragments cited in our publication forthcoming in the Journal of Coptic Studies. The captions also supply notes about the state of the fragments, as folded, inadvertently further fragmented, and so on. We hope that the captions will expand with discoveries made through crowdsourcing. A number of considerations prevented us from using a platform which would allow for users to post transcriptions, make comments, or edit. Instead, the portal to the galleries contains Stephen Davis's contact information and an invitation for scholars to contribute their expertise. The process of constructing the website consisted of 5 stages of work. During the first and most time-consuming stage of the project, I arranged the A and B photographs of each fragment as layers on an Adobe Photoshop canvas to produce a composite image. In the second stage, Bjorn Axelsson optimized the files for website publication. The third stage involved the reorganization of the photographs into user-friendly groupings for our anticipated audience. Not only were the expectations of our anticipated audience important, it was also important to divide the corpus into manageable chunks. This way, it would be possible to browse through hundreds of fragments. For this portion of the project, I relied on the notes we, which is to say Stephen Davis, Elizabeth Davidson, Daniel Shriver, and I, jotted down in field notebooks during our 2-week season in 2012. In our notes, we identified the language of the script on each fragment, either Coptic or Arabic. We transcribed the text, and we recorded codicological observations. So as to cater to the expectations of our anticipated audience, I reorganized the fragments as follows. In Egypt, we had sorted the fragments first by their locus or find location, then by their material type, parchment, paper, or binding material. However, our audience would take interest not in the specific floor areas of the candle room, but rather in the material type and language of the fragments. So I eliminated the loci as a category of classification and bumped material type up to the slot of primary classification. Using the field notebooks, I was able to cull data about the language of each fragment. This language data took the secondary slot of classification. So the primary classification became material type rather than locus. The secondary classification became language, Coptic, Arabic, or unidentified. Now, why didn't I reverse the order and make language the primary category and material type the secondary one? The corpus would not have been divided into manageable chunks that way. Users would have been faced with galleries of imbalanced sizes, some massive, some tiny. So much for the third stage of work. In the last two stages, we composed a written guide to the collection and edited drafts of the website before a final version was published in December 2014. An article concerning the find and an announcement of the website's availability will be published in the Journal of Coptic Studies under the title Left Behind, a recent discovery of manuscript fragments in the White Monastery Church. I and all the members of the Yale Monastic Archaeology Project welcome your thoughts on how we might promote crowdsourcing and improve the digital collection. Some small strides have already been made with the identification of 3 fragments and with the illumination of the history of the White Monastery Library's dispersal. But we hope more strides will be made. We hope that the publication of the website will facilitate future research. Thank you for your attention.
We have plenty of time for questions, so you are welcome to field your own questions. That's okay with you.
I just remember buying books in the gift shop, thinking that was the library. We, in our second stage, we will probably have a completely independent platform just for Coptic. And it'd be very easy to include your material in that crowdsourcing if you want to just already have an established web-based crowdsourcing tool. It could be tweaked for your needs. In other words, it could all be randomly put in with other stuff, or it would be a separate. And there's some hosting costs, but it's manageable. So if you want to consider it.
Absolutely, we'd love to. Thank you.
Oh, I don't know how exactly practical this is and how much help it will be, but it seems very feasible to look at some of the digital corpora where we have encoding for the lacuna and look for things that match your patterns. So if you have a tiny fragment that has in consecutive lines an alpha and a gamma, and in the next line just a whatever, an omicron, that seems completely impossible. But in a lot of, if this stuff is, for instance, coming from canons, we have a lot of canons material where the transcribers have postulated what the letter before must be. Of course, we encode that that's a lacuna. You could literally search in the corpora for lacunae that have 2 consecutive lines that end in an omicron followed by the next line. Even if it's completely devoid of context, you could find cases that match the letter arrangement that you have. So it's worth a try.
Absolutely. I would love to talk further about that.
So we have the other part of this. We have the pages without the dandruff. So. Puzzled.
In the case of the canon's fragment that Daniel Shriver identified, we do have another codex that has that text, but the particular codex that that fragment belongs to, the rest of that page is missing.
Right, and I saw those were the corners, and you had the page numbers and everything. But if you had something from the middle of something that you have no idea what is, it's definitely worth looking if somebody in one of the digital resources has a lacuna with 2 consecutive lines with these exact letters. You might actually be able to say, oh, okay, that's good.
That would be exciting.
It'll be pure luck, but it's worth a go.
So you have your search tool operative?
Oh, yes.
I haven't used it.
Yeah, and well, we can talk about it more tomorrow. I don't. Not all of the lacunae are. We have a mishmash in some of the text. The lacunae are encoded, and some of the ones they aren't because we weren't doing it yet. But that's not difficult to change, and it's certainly the plan is to do that moving forward when adding more manuscript text. I mean, they're visible. Lacunae, they're visible in some way, but it just depends on what you mean by encoding. It's sort of a long story, but
so the damaged ones have the dot, and the reconstruct ones are in
right.
brackets,
We at least have characters in there that you would be able to use, and some of them are actually encoded using XML elements to say there's a gap
here in the reason.
Right, that doesn't help that much because you don't know what's in the gap. In the cases where the transcriber reconstructed the preceding letter based on must be this,
Yes.
you could search for those and
Yes.
see if they exist. you know?
Yes, 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 yes.
How many more or less? I'm sorry, you probably mentioned, but how many of these fragments?
The ones with ink on them, just backtrack, I can give you the exact.
I mean, I'm on your page here, but I'm not.
Oh, it's further along let me click on the website. It's 800 something that have
Right.
writing on them, but there's the ones that had no writing on them, we decided to just count. We didn't photograph them.
Just copy paste that.
Okay.
Well, I'm on the Candle Room page.
It's
There we go.
You say 1,336 fragments. of
That's right.
paper and leather?
That's the total. And then I want to say 420 of those were blank. And then some of those are binding material. At the very bottom of the galleries, there's a section of like other writing materials as well. And that includes like a matchbox, an Austrian matchbox, petitions left by pilgrims to the monastery and so on.
Comparative.
Yeah.
How degraded is the ink on the fragments? I mean, they look pretty.
Yeah.
Apart from the character of the material, the writing looks like the ink is not very degraded. So
No, for the most part, the ink is visible. With the parchment, depending on whether you're looking on the flesh or the hair side, the ink can be flaky on one side.
the reason I was asking is because apparently blank things could actually have text if you use you know, some sort of image program.
Yeah.
May or may not be worth it for one month.
Yeah. We photographed literally if we even could see like a spot of ink that could either be dirt or ink, we photographed anyway, but the ones that literally seemed to show nothing, we didn't photograph. And we took that as an indication, a further indication that these are all really book dandruff, so edges primarily of pages. We have a lot of pieces that do seem that you can tell they come from the margin because we either have a right margin or a left margin or full corner as you saw in the one piece. And we thought maybe the blank ones were probably blanks marginal space. Who knows? But you could be right. We still have the fragments. We can still photograph them. I don't know if photographing them would help with.
Well, no, you have
technology.
to have the actual.
Yeah.
But
We could keep that in mind for a
talk to
future
your
season.
science colleagues, they can all.
Yeah.
So where are the fragments now?
They're in Egypt. They're in
They're
Sohag. Yeah.
They're in Sohag in the White Monastery,
I
or
believe so. If I remember correctly, they're stored in the very same inspectorate where we worked.
okay.
Yeah, unless they've moved them since then. It has been 3 years now.
And are there any plans to do further on-site study of these fragments, or are you just moving ahead and moving to crowdsourcing? Clarify what's going on.
Currently, we don't have plans for a future season, but I'm sure Stephen Davis would be open to that if we could have clear goals in mind for going out there. But at present, we don't. Yeah. At present, we're thinking about what to do with our field notebooks and how to pull the data from that and either put it on the website or do something else with it. Because we did transcribe quite a number of fragments and made observations that you can't make from the photographs themselves. So for instance, on that Beatitudes fragment, there were a few letters that you can't see since the fragment is folded. You can see a fold here. So there were some very important letters that were under that fold that he took from the field notebooks, and I was able to identify the text.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mary.
so exciting to see this because I had the privilege of being there during that 2-week field period when they were madly photographing these fragments. And so it is a thrill to see this come to fruition. So thank you. We planned since we have 4 presentations in the morning for just like a 10-minute little coffee, stretch your legs break. So please feel free to do that. The restrooms are around the corner. Don't go too far though, because we will start up again at about 10:40, I think is what I put on the
10
program.
minutes.
Yeah, so about 10 minutes.
I looked closer.
It's amazing knowing exactly where I am.